One of the huge problems in education today is teachers are fleeing the industry. They're leaving in droves. Almost every district across the country has teacher shortages. And there are lots of reasons for that. Some we just talked about. But there are other things like, matters of discipline and let's talk a little bit about, I saw you had an article, Soft on Consequence Discipline. And what are the impacts of that in the classroom? And maybe you've seen that firsthand yourself. I certainly hear about it all the time. I've seen it myself. And from the standpoint of policy, um, you know, how can we help our teachers?
Yeah. If you look at why teachers are leaving, the number one reason, there's a survey of over 1,000 teachers that I looked at just the other day, and they rated discipline even above pay. So you hear a lot of protests or strikes or over teacher pay. But when it comes to, well, why are teachers leaving the profession completely, like the biggest strike that they can go on, leaving and never coming back? Discipline, student behavior. It makes teaching a miserable job. It does.
And often they just don't feel safe
Oh yeah.
because when kids get out of control, as sometimes little kids, but particularly in middle and high school, you get somebody out of control in the classroom and you have no authority or no ability to bring discipline. You're not getting any support in the building. Look, that when the inmates are running the institution, something's upside down. So
Yeah.
carry on. I'm sorry for the
No,
interruption.
please interrupt anytime. You're probably going to offer far better insights than I do. I think about this past year. I'm 6'1", can't tell on a computer screen. Relatively well built. Like I'm above average. I'm a bigger person. But two students this year, another student who's 6'1", probably 40 pounds heavier than me, another student who was 6'5", got in a fight on the basketball court. And I had to jump in and help break that fight up. And again, I am not a giant by any means, bigger than most people. And that was the first time I was teaching where I was like, I actually was unsafe in that situation. And I could have gotten hurt. I could have gotten something broken, gotten pushed over and chipped a tooth or broken my nose or something like that. And I think about teachers who are smaller than me, who are weaker than me, who shouldn't have to be playing bouncer in their local school. Now, both of these boys were back the very next day in my classroom together. They were not suspended. They hardly even got a talking to from administration. They just it was the end of the day, so they kept them separate. They sent them home, and then they came back and were in my classroom the next day because suspending kids is mean and oppressive, apparently, or giving them any kind of consequence or laying down the law and saying, this is unacceptable, do it again and you are gone, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they were both in my room the next day, and I myself, all that day, was thinking, if they break out into a fight, there are chairs everywhere. There are things that can be thrown. There are desks. There are other students. Again, I'm a fully grown man. I was teaching middle school. These two boys happened to be giants, but most of their classmates were 5'2" and skinny as can be and would get trampled if if Godzilla and Mothra got in a fight in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
But soft on consequences approach to discipline is just that. It's almost a meme, a joke among teachers now that a student cusses them out. They call for administration help, hoping this kid's going to get attention, hoping that they'll be taken out of the class for the day so that the other 29 kids who are in there to learn, who want to do their work, who want to focus, can actually do their work and focus. So they call the admin, try and get some help with this kid that's acting a fool. 5 minutes later, the kid is brought back with a bag of hot Cheetos, and they give a fake apology. They're back in the classroom, and then they just keep going. And now that teacher's authority is gone. Every kid in that room knows we can get away with whatever we want, and Miss Penny is a chump and we don't have to listen to her. And at that moment is just, as a teacher, it's so defeating, deflating, and even terrifying and anxiety inducing, because now you have no control. A lot of the students know you have no control, the adults in the room, the authority in the room, and it's just anything could happen, anything goes.
So what I hear you say is the consequence was a break from the classroom, a bag of chips, and a pat on the shoulder. Hey, you can do this. You're going to be okay. Let's go and try to be a nice guy. And so it was, instead of consequences, it was reward.
Mm-hmm.
And so guess what's going to happen next time? So let's talk about solutions. How should things operate? Let's go back. Do you have any experience in that, or maybe you just have some suggestions?
I take issue with the idea of solutions, and I think you're going to agree with this. This isn't something we're going to, it's like I'm really disagreeing with you, but people, I get that asked that all the time when I'm talking about behavior, often from smug, smarmy people. What are your solutions? You're always complaining. What are your solutions? We can't solve human nature, and this goes back to the beginning of our discussion. I think people see the implementation of something like detentions or suspensions or expulsions, and they say, well, we do these and the kids keep misbehaving. And I say, yep, like kids are going to misbehave. And we can improve behavior. We can create incentive structures that make it worse, but we're never going to get rid of Johnny shooting spitballs. We're never going to completely get rid of kids having fights. That's going to happen. It can happen more often. It can happen less often. But it's all a matter of how do we respond to that misbehavior. Mm-hmm. There are examples of what not to do. Great examples. The state of Illinois, city of Philadelphia, I'm pretty sure like all of California has gotten rid of suspensions for low-level disruptions. So if a kid brings drugs or a weapon to school, you can still kick them out for a few days. But for things like disrespecting a teacher, cussing out a teacher, or even just like constantly disrupting class in a minor way, you'll hear a kid, they kicked me out for talking. And it's like, well, you were talking and then you were talking more. And then I gave you a detention, but then you kept talking. I called your mom, you kept talking. And now we need to up the ante a little bit. So that's what they mean by low-level disruption. In each case, behavior worsened, grades dropped, truancy increased, and ironically, time spent in suspensions increased because behavior got worse. So more kids were choosing to do things like smoke weed in the bathroom. And then rather than getting a 1-day suspension for something small, they got a 5-day suspension for having drugs on school property. And more kids spent time out of school. An example of what can work, I always, if anyone's listened to more than one podcast with me, they've probably heard this example before. But I worked in one middle school that for 1 month functioned really well because the soft on consequences assistant principal that was pushing all of this stuff had to go on family leave for a while. And one of the district admin came in to fill in for a month and a half. And this guy focused on attendance and tardies. We had fights in the bathroom. We had graffiti on the wall. We had all of this other stuff that he could focus on. He said, no, we're going to do attendance. And he implemented this very basic policy. When the bell rang, teachers closed the door, didn't let kids in late. He said, lock it, close it, start teaching. They swept the halls. Any kid that were still in the hall, they would bring them to, we had like a theater in the building. They brought them there. They checked them off. If there was one tardy, a hall monitor would bring them to class. We'd let them in. No questions asked. Once they got to 3, they had a 1-hour detention in the theater, spread out, took their phone. They had to sit there in silence. After that, the consequences increased towards suspensions. I don't know if they would ever expel a kid for this, but all sorts of interventions, getting parents involved, getting all of this kinds of stuff. And lo and behold, there were some kids who were still in the hall every single day, but we got all of those fence sitters. We got, 85% of the kids who were tardy, who were wandering the halls, realized, I don't want to bother with all of this. I'll just go to class. And then they started rubbing shoulders with their more academically minded kids. Class routines ran more smoothly because teachers weren't getting interrupted 3 minutes into class, and then 5 minutes into class, and then 8 minutes into class, as all of these kids wandered in late and they had to kind of start from the top again. These kids who were wandering the halls now developed relationships with their teachers and realized, oh, actually, this book we're reading is actually kind of interesting. And all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden, things in the school started running way more smoothly. Everything worked a little bit better because we focused on this small, seemingly petty, inconsequential issue, getting to class on time and having a um, zero tolerance for tardiness, for wandering in the halls, and everything started working better. And undergirding that was a consequence system. You're going to have to sit
Yeah.
silently in a theater. If you aren't willing to do that, just get out of the building for the day. We're going to inconvenience your parents, and now you're going to have a conversation at home that you don't want to have. So that's an example of a discipline structure that worked so well.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I wasn't planning to go here, but I'm going to share this little story, and then we're going to take a quick break. My experience is there are always those kids that seem to be the disruptors in the class. Uh, and a lot of times I think it's just because they are bored or other things. So they're not engaged. They're not drawn in. Kind of goes back to the illustration we were talking about earlier, where you sit there and you're supposed to be quiet and read a book. And some kids, it's just like, I don't want to read a book. I'm bored, and my mind's going here and going there and going somewhere else. And so some of these things are the way instruction is taking place. Some of these things are about, even grouping students. Some students have specific needs, and cookie cutter classroom guidance doesn't always work. We have to be innovative in how we do this. And it's interesting because, and this is not as an excuse or as that, we want to encourage kids to be the disruptors. But the reality is this: as you watch kids through life, and I've been doing this long enough that I've seen several generations of students finish school and go on out into life. And now you see them out in the real world. And often it's those BC students who you thought, man, they're just not that good a student. And they were always a little on the edge and kind of the disruptors, but they're the ones that are running the big businesses. They're the ones that are bringing leadership in our communities. They're the ones that are creating and innovating, and they're leading the society. The ones who are the straight A students and who are quiet and timid, they're having impact too, but they're in a laboratory somewhere where it's quiet and they're focused and they're zeroed in on something. And I think putting perspective into all that, sometimes I think we have to look at it, because it's not just this general, yes, there have to be policies. There are solutions, but solutions are never one size fits all. And so being creative and having those things that again come back to principles, just like this administrator came in and said, okay, so learning the discipline of being punctual, the discipline of not disrupting the teacher and the rest of the class because of your neglect. These kinds of things put the focus on the right things that ultimately help improve situations. And I think those many different applications, a lot of creativity has to take place. But at the end of the day, we have what we get when we go into the teaching field. And part of the challenge in any kind of a school setting is to take all of these kids and make it work for everybody. so that everyone has opportunity and ability to thrive. That's a very, very difficult task, but we'll be right back. Well, thank you for staying with us, and hope you're enjoying this podcast with Daniel Buck. And so appreciate him sharing some of his insights with us. I want to just jump in with one more little thing here before we kind of break down and kind of go into some closing thoughts. Let's talk about grading in schools. We talked about discipline and some of these issues, but I mean, back in the day, look, 70 was a failure when I went to school. I mean, if you got a 70 or a 69, you flunked. Okay. And over the years, things have, scaled down, scaled down, scaled down. Now, instead of A, B, C, D, E, F, there are no D's and F's in most places. And, there are no zeros. I mean, you completely miss a test or whatever. And, that kind of stuff is not even added into your grade stuff. Kids are just kind of passed through the system. And we see all kinds of consequences from that. We have, students graduating high school and can't read on a fourth grade level, and so many things. And a lot of times it's because of assessment and the grading system. That is a fundamental problem. And again, it kind of goes back to just, well, we got to get them out of here and get them through here. But is that really the goal? Because if that is what we do, we are failing our kids. Let's talk about that and some of your thoughts.
So this is a discussion where I am open to the idea of innovations. There are other approaches to grading other than the traditional A to F scale. Mm-hmm. And the A to F scale is more effective than people, I think, sometimes give it credit. The high school GPA is a pretty darn good predictor of college success and even like lifetime earnings. So there's a lot of valuable knowledge that is passed along of a student's GPA, of their academic quality, of, I don't want to say behavior quality, but there are certain habits that are going to make you more likely to succeed or not succeed in life. You talked about, BC students, some of them become the people who lead our society, but that's a small percentage of these BC students. My students always like to be like, well, Abraham Lincoln didn't finish school. Like, what are the chances that you're going to be Abraham Lincoln, though? 1% of the B, C, D, F students go on to become great entrepreneurs. All the rest of them don't. Are you one of those? Are you one of those 1%? You're going to take that gamble? And it's kind of aggressive, but I don't know. Sometimes kids need a dose of truth in their life, and the truth isn't always fun to hear. Anyways, A to F scale, it's pretty effective. But there are other approaches that people are floating out there, mastery or standards-based grading, where you set this curricular goal, and if the kids get the good grade when they meet it, you want them to explain what the Holocaust is in a paragraph. They did it, great, you get the grade for it. Or comparative grading, kind of more grading on a curve. But if I get a stack of essays, rather than going off of a rubric, you read it and you say, this is the top third, this is the middle third, and here are the third that just didn't seem to try at all. And you can tell the difference between the kids who tried really hard and just didn't do so well, and the kids who just didn't put any effort in. The difference as a teacher. But you kind of put them in 3 different stacks and then grade them according to that, not trying to give some objective, well, here's the 78% and here's where you get a 78% and not a 77%. So I'm open to these other approaches, but what a lot of districts and even a lot of once very demanding charter schools, exacting charter schools are doing, they're just setting the floor at 50%. So if a kid doesn't hand anything in they get 50%. That's the lowest grade a teacher can give. Even if the teacher, again, this is where the teachers are often being forced into these things that they don't want to do. They'll put it into the system as a 0, and the system rounds it up to a 50%. So kind of the software keeps them from doing this. My school in Green Bay did this. And I remember when we saw that happened, the reaction of the teachers was like, this is going to be a disaster. So I'm open to these other approaches. We can maybe use the analogy of a bridge. We got this old stone arch bridge that's kind of falling apart. It works. It still works a lot better than people kind of give it credit. But maybe it's one lane across the river and there's some traffic backup, and we want to replace it with, with 2 lanes on each side, suspension, a cantilever bridge, or whatever. This analogy is going on too far. Rather than tearing it down and replacing it with something completely new, a lot of districts are blowing up the bridge halfway and calling the problem fixed. And it's just the worst of all the options. Rather than trying something new and innovative, they're just undercutting the current traditional system that they have. The Wall Street Journal has done some reporting that pandemonium and laziness are the result, because I asked my students about this, like, what would happen, you guys, if the lowest grade I could give would be a 50%? They sat back for a second and they're like, we'd all stop working as much, because we know, there are kids that are always going to strive for the 100%. There are also going to be a lot of kids that they know, I cannot do most of these things. And then if I hand in a few assignments over the course of the quarter, or if I just do the final project, I'm going to get a C. And you know what? That's good enough. It's not going to get me a detention. It's going to get me the diploma. And that's good enough. So you get a lot of sloth and laziness, or kids even acting out. We're seeing some stories of teachers saying that behavior is harder to manage because the kids aren't doing the work. And if they don't have the work to do, they're going to find something to do, and it's not going to always be productive.
Yeah, well, these are challenges, and I think we probably don't have the answers, but I think these are definitely things that are problematic that have to be resolved in our local schools. We don't have time to solve those all today. What primary takeaway would you leave for teachers who are listening to this conversation? What do you want to say to teachers?
Pick up a book by E.D. Hirsch and start learning about traditional approaches to the classroom. They work really, really well. I want to see the classical education movement spread. I want to see the approaches to the classroom that kind of a lot of no excuse charter schools use become more normative and mainstream. Perhaps a word of comfort, as a lot of teachers are seeing chaos in their classrooms. That's not their fault. It can really quickly start to feel like it's your fault, but it's not. If administration is setting you up for failure, if they're not backing you up, if parents aren't backing you up, if the society's blaming you, like, it's not your fault, even though it feels like it is. I see the pendulum starting to swing back. I see common sense coming back to the classroom. More people reporting on the behavior in schools. There are a lot of movements out there. Research Ed, Doug Lemov's organization, Teach Like a Champion, the classical education movement is like becoming mainstream now. There's a lot of common sense that's coming into the classroom. Find the people, Robert Pondicio, Jeremy Tate, Doug Lemov, Tom Bennett, Catherine Berbelsing. Follow these people on social media. Read what they're reading. Read what they're writing, follow their examples. Teaching can be such a rewarding career, and I think there are so many examples of successful schools where teaching is just so rewarding, so much fun, so fulfilling, so successful, and it can be done. And I tend to be very pessimistic about education, but right now in this moment, I'm feeling very optimistic about it because I see what education can be, and become a part of that movement of sanity.
That's a great word. That is a great word. The reality is we need our teachers. We need some of them to quit because they're awful, but there are a whole lot of them. Uh, they're there for the right reasons. They really love the kids. They care about the issue. They've prepared themselves. They're experts in their field, um, and they need to be empowered and strengthened. And and a lot of that does come, like you were saying. Let's get back to the foundational principles, those things that always work, and become an advocate for those things where you are in your classroom. Uh, Try those things, find out how well they work, and I think you'll find that your colleagues often will be willing to join you, your administration, if they see good results. Everybody's looking for good results, and be a leader. Be a leader. We need you. Great. Let's shift now to parents. What are some of the thoughts you have for parents, concerned parents? They love their kids. They care about their kids. They want the best for their kids. And whether they're in a private school, a public school, homeschooling, I mean, it's all out there, and we support all of it. We believe the parents should have the authority, the right, and to be able to, and just to do what they believe is best for the kids. Uh, what do you have to say for parents?
For parents, and I found a lot of parents have already done this. I've been on some like parent podcasts, and I'm astounded by how well read these parents are in education theory and practice and all this kind of stuff. But I think parents are realizing they can't necessarily just send their kids to school and trust that everything's going to be fine. And so the best thing parents can do is pick up a book or two about education. Obviously, I want you to read mine, What is Wrong with Our Schools. Will kind of give you a pretty good overview. But E.D. Hirsch is another great author. A whole lot of stuff out there on classical education. But pick up a book or two about educational theory and approaches to instruction and reading and all of these kinds of things. Because so much in education, like you said, a lot of it's a sales pitch. Where's the money? Cui bono? Who benefits? There are these euphonious sounding ideas. Individualized education is a good example. We want individualized education for our students. What does that really mean in practice in the classroom? Sometimes, let's say I have a classroom, I had about 30 kids this year, 50-minute class. That if I'm going to individualize education for those kids, I'm going to go to each one, and that leaves me 2 minutes with each kid in a class period. And then what else is every other kid getting while I'm with 2 minutes with Johnny, then 2 minutes with Tammy, then 2 minutes with Susie, then whoever, every other kid is getting ignored. So sometimes something like individualized education in reality means collective neglect, where whole class instruction, where you're doing, 20 minutes of instruction, explaining up front, doing examples, a whole class, giving analogies, doing some call and response, and then we're all practicing the same thing. Then the whole class is getting the teacher's whole attention that entire time. So something like individualized education sounds great in theory, not so great in practice. So educating yourself about education, even though you're not a teacher and it's like, this doesn't really apply to me. If you want to be an effective advocate for your kids, you don't want to be duped by the district trying to candy coat things, or educational salesmen trying to push the latest fad that just isn't effective. You need to be educated yourself. And again, I think a lot of parents are doing this now, and it's great. And in my book, the last chapter is this long, like annotated bibliography, basically, of here are some other resources. If you're looking for discipline, policy, instruction, curriculum, long books, essays, theory, research, I break it all down so you can kind of see, what am I looking for? What do I want to read? And find exactly the book that you want. You can get my book, and then that will help you find other resources to look into.
So, where can they get your book?
Amazon's the best spot. If you look up Daniel Buck, What is Wrong with Our Schools, it'll be right there for you. It's on Target
Super.
and Barnes & Noble's website and other two, but we all use Amazon nowadays, I think.
Okay. So, I agree with what you're just saying to parents about, educate yourself, stay engaged, be aware, know what's going on. It's not about going back in time, but it's about foundational concepts and principles. And I think he has some great ones. You can find some of those on our website, NWEF.org. And so dig into these things. So Daniel, do you have a website? Do you have other things, resources quickly you want to share with our listeners where they can learn more?
I do not have a website currently. I was just thinking as I was driving back from dropping my daughter off that I do need to start a website for myself, probably. But the best place to find me, shamefully, is on Twitter. My handle's Mr.
Okay.
Daniel Buck. Daniel Buck was already taken, so I had to throw a Mr. in there. Most of my writing is at um, National Review and the Fordham Institute. National Review, you're going to get more, politics and culture war kind of engagement than Fordham Institute, whereas got a foot in the academic world. So if you're looking for research and very practical advice and kind of more nerdy, wonkery articles, that's where you're going to go for that stuff. But First Things, National Affairs, Wall Street Journal, I've written all over the place. So, yeah, Twitter's the best place for you to stay up to date, but all of my writing, most of it is National Review and the Fordham Institute.
At Mr. Daniel Buck, it's been a delight to have you today. Thank you for taking this time and sharing with us and our listeners. God bless you for your work.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This is a great fun.